Chapter 393, File a Grievance. Of the 5 Dao protectors Bai Xiaochun had brought with him, the only one unaccounted for was Song Ke. The other 4 had all returned to Bai Xiaochun's side. Even Chen Minyao was behaving herself. To Bai Xiaochun, it felt completely wonderful to have people relying on him for reasons other than his cultivation base. It was something he often thought about during his meditation sessions. Now that Big Fatty Zhang was back, Bai Xiaochun felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from his heart. Big Fatty Zhang was different than Master God Diviner and Zhu Bokai. Their friendship had begun on the very first day that Bai Xiaochun became a part of the cultivation world. In fact, almost as soon as Big Fatty Zhang arrived at the Azure Dragon Society, he became its second most important figure, with a standing higher than Master God Diviner and Zhu Bokai. Of course, Master God Diviner and Zhu Bokai took this in stride. They were well aware of how close Bai Xiaochun and Big Fatty Zhang were. As the Azure Dragon Society expanded and grew more powerful, not only did they compete with the Celestial Sky Society with their fantasy pills, but in other areas as well. However, such efforts couldn't be met with success quickly, and needed a lot of merit points to be invested. At the moment, the fantasy pills were still the bread and butter of the Azure Dragon Society. Bai Xiaochun didn't actually have a hand in such matters. He delegated the authority to Big Fatty Zhang and the others. Overall, Bai Xiaochun was completely pleased with how amazing he was. The only thing that he wasn't happy about was that he actually didn't own his own Immortals cave. Everything in Sky City was rented out by the sect. After making some inquiries, he learned that it would be easier to find a phoenix feather or a Chilean horn than to find someone in Sky City who owned their own property. The only way to get one would be to have someone very powerful backing you. Unfortunately, Bai Xiaochun didn't have any powerful backers, so he had no choice other than to abandon the idea. Instead, he focused on his cultivation, using much of his profits from the Azure Dragon Society to purchase spirit medicines and spirit food to increase the speed of his progress. It was only after spending about 1 million merit points that he finally reached the point where he had successfully cultivated the 3rd level of the Undying Life Forever technique from the toes of his left foot all the way up to his calf. When that part of his leg pulsed with the power of his undying muscles, he could send astonishing fluctuations rolling out from it, fluctuations that could shake heaven and earth with intense power. The power in his left leg vastly surpassed that of his right leg, and was the source of the most incredibly fleshly body power he had at his disposal. After a few tests, Bai Xiaochun realized that he hadn't just experienced an increase in strength, but also speed. At the moment, his left leg could move at least twice as fast as his right. Of course, even before that, he had been one of the top figures in his cultivation level in terms of speed, thanks to his undying Heavenly King body and Heaven Dao Gold Core. Therefore, anyone who saw his speed now would be left gasping with shock. In fact, thanks to this increase in speed, Bai Xiaochun actually felt as if the other parts of his body were sluggish. One day, when I finished cultivating the undying muscles, then when I burst out with full speed. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Bai Xiaochun's eyes shone with anticipation. Back in the Middle Reaches, in the river-defying sect, it would have taken a very long time to reach this point, even with the help of the blood ancestor. But here at the source of the river, in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, the indescribably strong spiritual power, plus the vastly superior spirit medicines and spirit food, made everything completely different. The only catch was that acquiring those resources required merit points, and a lot of them. Thankfully, that was exactly what Bai Xiaochun had. In addition to his success with his undying muscles, the vast quantity of merit points at his disposal ensured that his frigid school will evolving incantation also advanced by leaps and bounds. The Heavenspan River water here was much different than in the lower or middle reaches. It was so much stronger and purer that the lesser versions could hardly compare. At one point, he even spent tens of thousands of merit points to buy an entire bowlful. Eventually, he reached the peak of the frigid acolyte level. With the wave of a hand, he could cause frigid coldness to fill a 300-meter area, within which would appear a single blurry frigid shadow. Bai Xiaochun could switch positions with the frigid shadow at will. If used correctly in combat, it was a trick that could help him win in an unexpected way, and perhaps even turn a defeat at the hands of a powerful opponent into a victory. Bai Xiaochun was very excited about this, and even set up a special training ground to practice in. After sealing the place so that he was completely alone, he performed some tests. Upon summoning the frigid shadow in a location inside the 300-meter frozen area, he could take a step forward and then instantly take the shadow's place. It was almost like a teleportation. After familiarizing himself with the process, he was left so excited that it was difficult to put into words. After reaching the peak of the frigid acolyte level, his techniques all improved, and his cultivation base also advanced. Because of the frigid chi buildup in his Heaven Dao Gold Core, his cultivation base was now at the peak of the early Gold Core stage. With one more step forward, he could break through into mid-Gold Core. Bai Xiaochun was already certain of how to head in the direction of that breakthrough. It was none other than reaching the frigid adept level. Once I reach the frigid adept level, I'll step into the mid-Gold Core stage. And that day isn't too far off. He threw his head back and laughed uproariously, musing that coming to the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect really was the right choice. In fact, if he had known how wonderful Sky City was going to be, he would have come earlier. Even as Bai Xiaochun reveled in complacency, the hostilities between the Celestial Sky Society and the Azure Dragon Society were increasing. In fact, numerous meetings had been held in the Celestial Sky Society to try to figure out what to do about Bai Xiaochun and the Azure Dragon Society. Unfortunately, Bai Xiaochun was a core formation cultivator, something that had caught them completely unawares, and had also lost them the initiative. Their previous failed attempt to take him out had also significantly damaged their awe-inspiring reputation. Of even greater significance than that was that the sheer size of the Azure Dragon Society made any schemes and plots they hatched relatively useless. Furthermore, in terms of their ability to use force, although they had a powerful background, they didn't have even a single core formation cultivator in their organization. Although everyone talked about how they came from a clan with a Deva patriarch, the truth was that the top orange-robed disciples in the Celestial Sky Society were nothing but servants in that clan. As such, their background sounded very impressive, but nobody in the clan really cared that much about them. They really had no choice other than to report the matter to some of their superiors and hope that someone would show up to help them. However, despite having made several such requests over the past months, nobody had paid them any attention. Things to do with core formation cultivators weren't very important to the clan as a whole, and definitely wouldn't mobilize the forces of the entire clan to help them. The Celestial Sky Society would have to handle the matter on their own. After waiting for quite some time without getting a response, the people in the Celestial Sky Society realized what was going on, and yet, weren't willing to just give in. We can't let things keep going on this way. That's right, that damned Azure Dragon Society rose up too quickly and violently. If we don't do something soon, we're going to be playing second fiddle to them forever. But the clan has been ignoring us. I can't believe we haven't been able to turn up any information about the background of Boss Azure Dragon. There's something fishy going on, I'm telling you. It's almost as if someone has wiped out all records of him. As the discussion played out, a shadowy figure sat off to the side, a person who seemed to be wreathed in flickering darkness. Suddenly, he spoke in a sinister voice. Since the clan is ignoring us and Boss Azure Dragon is too mysterious, then why don't just take the fantasy pills out of the picture? That would cripple the Azure Dragon Society, resolve this deadlock, and also make it more clear how to completely finish things. As for exactly how to take the fantasy pills out of the picture, it's simple. You people just never put enough thought into it. Simply file a grievance with the sect regarding fantasy pills. After all, they still aren't really legal to sell. His words were met with silence, and yet, all of the Celestial Sky Society's leaders' eyes began to shine brightly. The person who had just spoken was none other than the boss of the Celestial Sky Society. After the decision was formalized, the Celestial Sky Society sprang into action. They compiled a list of all the supposed side effects and harmful aspects of the fantasy pill and reported them to the sect. Furthermore, they backed the effort with all the money and connections they had at their disposal. 3 days later, an order came down from Sky Quarter Rainbow, which was announced everywhere in Sky City. The Sky Quarter Peak Lord had ordered that disciples were forbidden from purchasing fantasy pills. And there was more. A jade slip shot through the air in a bright beam of light toward the Immortals cave that was the headquarters of the Azure Dragon Society. It pierced through all of the defensive spell formations like a hot knife through butter before coming to a stop before Bai Xiaochun. Then, scintillating light burst out from it, along with a profoundly ancient voice. Hostess Bai Xiaochun from the river defying sectors to report immediately to the Sky Quarter Peak Lord. Chapter 394, Sky Quarter Rainbow. Bai Xiaochun had just been in the middle of performing some breathing exercises, so the sudden arrival of the jade slip caused his eyes to go wide. Shivering, he said, "The Sky Quarter Peak Lord? He wants to see me? What does he want? I don't even know him." From the tone he had detected in that voice just now, the speaker hadn't seemed very pleased. What's going on? Even as Bai Xiaochun's nervousness began to mount, Master God Diviner and Zhu Bokai showed up, serious expressions on their faces. Big Fatty Zhang seemed very angry, and the other leaders all looked extremely anxious. Zhu Bokai gritted his teeth and said, "Junior Patriarch, the Starry Sky Dao Polarity Sect just issued orders prohibiting the trafficking of fantasy pills. This is definitely the handiwork of the Celestial Sky Society. They're trying to cut off our main source of income." Zhu Bokai's life had been quite comfortable lately, and he had very much enjoyed seeing merit points rolling in without stop. But now, it seemed that it all was coming to an end. How could he not get nervous? "What do we do, boss? Without fantasy pills, the Azure Dragon Society is in great danger." "That's right. We've been expanding too quickly recently, and the news about the restrictions on the fantasy pills is definitely going to spread like wildfire through the city." Zhu Bokai wasn't the only nervous one. The other cultivators in the Azure Dragon Society were all thinking the same thing. After all, the vast majority of the Azure Dragon Society's income came from fantasy pills. Without those pills, the Azure Dragon Society's enormous size would quickly become its biggest disadvantage. After all, to maintain its current size required a significant merit point expenditure in salaries. If too much time went by, they would be forced to cut back in certain areas, and the Celestial Sky Society would definitely take advantage of that. They would go in for the kill, and try to destroy all the advances that the Azure Dragon Society had made in the past. In the final analysis, the biggest problem was that the Azure Dragon Society didn't have any resources built up. Compared to the Celestial Sky Society, they were like a huge, empty building, fundamentally unstable and prone to collapse at any moment. Sadly, other than Bai Xiaochun's Dao protectors, virtually all of the other Azure Dragon Society cultivators present were all starting to ponder what move to make next. If the leadership was doing that, it almost wasn't necessary to mention the ordinary cultivators who made up the rest of the organization. Bai Xiaochun knew that if he didn't handle this situation well, the entire Azure Dragon Society could collapse. However, now wasn't the moment to ponder the Azure Dragon Society's situation. The glittering jade slip still hovered in front of him, and even as everyone who had just rushed in was still peppering him with questions, his eyes flashed, and he cleared his throat. "What are you getting so anxious for?" Everyone's mouth snapped shut. Bai Xiaochun was the boss of the Azure Dragon Society, and a gold core cultivator. Even more importantly, he was the inventor of the fantasy pill. Although he didn't have much of a role in the daily operations of the organization, the Azure Dragon Society was his, and he was the most stabilizing force within it. "I know the Celestial Sky Society has powerful backers, but did you really think I wouldn't have some too?" With that, he rose to his feet, stuck his chin up, and pointed at the jade slip. "Look at that, all of you. What is it?" Everyone looked over in surprise, and soon people realized that it was an object from the Rainbow District. "That's the command medallion of the Peak Lord of Sky Quarter Rainbow. I knew I saw a beam of light flying down from Sky Quarter Rainbow. So, it came here. It was actually a message for our exalted boss." The cultivators of the Azure Dragon Society couldn't help but gasp as they looked over at Bai Xiaochun, eyes shining with bright light. "Don't tell me that the boss actually has special connections with Sky Quarter itself?" As everyone was reeling in shock, Zhu Bokai, Master God Diviner, and Big Fatty Zhang were all staring at Bai Xiaochun with blank looks, completely unable to wrap their minds around how he could possibly be connected to the Sky Quarter Peak Lord. "As long as you understand the situation," Bai Xiaochun said coolly. "Well, now I'm going to go pay a formal visit to the Sky Quarter Peak Lord. We'll figure out our next step after I get back." With that, he waved his sleeve, grabbing the jade slip and walking out the chamber. As he left, all of the Azure Dragon Society cultivators clasped hands and bowed. Although they were still somewhat worried, they felt much more relieved than they had been moments before. That attitude would have a big influence on the cultivators under their control, and at the very least, would ensure that the restrictions placed on fantasy pills would not cause chaos in the Azure Dragon Society, at least not for the time being. Bai Xiaochun's act had been pulled off perfectly. Even Big Fatty Zhang had been taken in, and watched Bai Xiaochun with both confidence and anticipation. However, as soon as Bai Xiaochun left the Azure Dragon Society's Immortals cave, he almost collapsed into tears. Moments before, he had been standing tall and straight, but now he was racked with anxiety. At the same time, his rage toward the Celestial Sky Society burned hotter than ever. However, there was no time now to dwell on his anger. "What does the Sky Quarter Peak Lord want with me?" he thought nervously as he headed toward a certain location in the central district of Sky City that led to the Rainbow District. This was where newly promoted yellow-robed disciples would come to head to the rainbow. As for red and orange-robed disciples, they could only enter this area if they had special invitations or orders. Upon reaching the teleportation portal, he produced the jade slip and took a deep breath. Trying to look solemn and tragic, as if he were going for broke, he stepped forward into the portal. Rumbling sounds could be heard, along with the dazzling light of teleportation, which wrapped around him for a moment before fading away, and him along with it. When he reappeared, he was in the third level of rainbows at the bottom of the waterfall, on the second rainbow. As soon as he materialized, he looked around to find himself surrounded by richly ornamented buildings connected by green jade paths. Immortal trees flourished everywhere, and spiritual energy wafted about, making the place seem like the picture of a celestial paradise. There were ponds and immortals' caves, as well as domesticated spirit creatures frolicking within the trees and waters. Soft, seven-colored light permeated the entire area, creating a spectacular scene of beauty. Yellow-robed disciples could be seen everywhere, sitting in meditation or strolling about. Everything was quiet and peaceful, completely lacking the raucous brouhaha common in Sky City. There were flowing crowds of people, and yet all of the cultivators looked cold and indifferent. Each and every one seemed tall and slender, with mysterious lights swirling around them that made them seem like something from beyond the mortal world. Apparently, there was some sort of restrictive spell in place that made the strong spiritual energy softer and more gentle, and ensured that one's energy was not drained while absorbing it. Bai Xiaochun was immediately taken aback. This was his first time seeing the world that existed on the rainbow, and he couldn't help but rub his eyes to make sure he wasn't seeing things. Sure enough, it was all there. One interesting thing he noted was that although the Rainbow District was large, it was only about half the size of Sky City. Even as Bai Xiaochun looked around in amazement, the air in front of him distorted, and a female yellow-robed disciple stepped out of thin air. She had long flowing hair, and lovely facial features, although her expression was a bit cold. Looking Bai Xiaochun up and down, she said, "You're Bai Xiaochun?" A serious expression took over Bai Xiaochun's eyes. This young woman was at the peak of the early core formation stage, just like him, and yet the method she had used to appear in front of him was quite astonishing. This was his first time encountering someone in the Starry Sky Dao polarity sect who was in the same cultivation level as himself, and also his first time seeing firsthand some of the divine abilities and magical techniques that he had only just heard about so far. If her cultivation base had been higher than his, he might have reacted differently. But considering they were in the same level, he decided that he couldn't let himself look weak, so he proudly stated, "Yeah, I'm Bai Xiaochun. Who are you? Come with me. My master wants to see you. By the way, watch your step around here. Core formation cultivators can get killed here very easily if they get lost." With that, she turned and began to walk off. Her words made Bai Xiaochun feel more nervous than ever as he hurried to follow her. The two of them became two beams of bright light that shot off into the distance. As they flew along, Bai Xiaochun looked down at the things passing by below, and quickly came to realize how the sky quarter rainbows were set up. There were 5 ring-shaped districts that seemed to be filled with more coldness and pressure the further they went toward the center. Eventually, the young woman led him to the middle ring, where a shockingly tall mountain peak became visible. It was surrounded by dazzling 7-colored light, and was completely devoid of any type of plants or vegetation. The only thing visible on the peak was an enormous temple, grey in color and surrounded by an indescribable energy. Just by looking at it, Bai Xiaochun got the feeling that it wasn't a temple, but rather, an ancient wild beast. The young woman came to a stop after leading Bai Xiaochun to the foot of the mountain. Then, she stepped back a few paces, maintaining her silence. Even as Bai Xiaochun was wondering what exactly she was doing, an ancient voice suddenly drifted out from the temple at the peak of the mountain. "Admit to your crimes, Bai Xiaochun.